Welcome back to another episode of Let's Pretend I Don't Know Anything. Still here again with Dr. Brooke Keels. We're talking about, last episode we were talking about signs and symptoms of use or mental health disorders in our loved ones. We were pretty specific with adolescents at that point, though obviously adolescents aren't the only ones in the family that can struggle with mental health disorders and substance use. So, in order to help people that may be experiencing this with their younger children or spouses or siblings or parents, right? Some of the things we can talk about.
Yeah.
I know, I think a big issue for me in my life was the things I was going through as a teenager, though my use and my mental health were both suffering greatly in high school. Is that my parents tend to look at it as more like normal high school partying, right? Like, oh yeah, I grew up in El Paso, so oh yeah, they're going to Juarez, and that's just normal. But I was going to Juarez on a Tuesday, but that was kind of a rite of passage for us growing up on the border, and then, but it was much more severe for me at the time.
Right.
Obviously, that continued to progress post. But I've worked with plenty of families and individuals where what appeared to be normal high school partying and the individual was still functioning enough where they had the grades, or maybe they were still involved in sports. Maybe they still had that same friend group. All of these changes that we talked about in adolescence weren't really showing up. And then they went off to school. And then this stuff started to show up, and what things families should be looking for on that end. What's happening. Yeah. So I would say one of the things that would be a key component across the board is physical change.
Yes.
Rapid weight loss or weight gain on either side.
Yep.
Right. So if they leave in August and they come back in December and there's a 30-pound fluctuation, we may have a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, assuming college or career or whatever happens after high school, I think there are the obvious things like shifts in grades, shifts in, frankly, just physically doing things. I think what we're seeing more and more are these, college students or work from home people who are just literally holed up in their room, kind of getting by with their online classes, their online work, and they're not leaving.
Yeah.
I mean, they're getting food delivered, drugs delivered, everything is coming to them and they don't have to leave anymore. And so the major isolation, and then as family, if they're off, then you're not seeing them every day, and you expect communication to shift when somebody goes off to college or to their first job. But even then, as they get older, I think we hear a lot too, like, well, they got through it like by the skin of their teeth. And it's kind of like you just wait for the next season. You're like, let's just like get through this and then it'll be fine. And let's get through this and then it'll be fine. And it just progressively gets worse.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think another key component to all of it, another big symptom is dishonesty.
Yes.
And we can be very good at manipulation and dishonesty.
Right.
So what I've experienced with it is we'll create scenarios and lies that are very difficult to pick apart. They're either just vague enough or there's just enough truth that it's hard to unravel that. What I would recommend is trust your gut on it. Like if you think that whatever they're saying is not right, is not the truth, then you're probably right.
Yeah.
And it's hard to want to think that, I went through a scenario with one of my kids where it was like, this doesn't seem right to me, what you're telling me, but I want to believe you.
Right.
I really want to believe you. I want to believe that you can't look me in the eye and lie to me.
Right.
Right. But they're not 8 years old anymore.
Right.
They're human beings. They're adults now, or one of them is, and things change, and their ability to do things changes. And I did not trust my gut in the moment, and I should have.
Right.
As I I wanted to believe the best,
Yeah.
you know, only to find out that school was struggling. Right. And so if you feel like they're not telling you they're not being truthful, they probably aren't.
Right. And you don't have to be a jerk about that. I think that's where, you know, it's like people for different reasons are dishonest, whether it's manipulation or fear or shame or whatever it is. You know, we as the family or of loved ones or the friends can be healthy, stable people, no matter what is being said to us. But on that note, I think one of my favorite phrases is, I hear what you say, but I believe what you do. And I think that allows us to separate ourselves from like what's being said and getting caught in the lies of all of it, or even what they think they're telling the truth. And it's like, are you, you know, and kind of just like, well, let's look at the observable, tangible behaviors and things that we're seeing.
Let's stick to the evidence.
Yeah. Like, great. You're doing well in school. Show me.
Yeah.
You know, let's look at it, you know, and go through. And I mean, look, my kid, he's 13 and he's the sweetest kid ever, but he gets anxiety about, you know, how he's kind of a little bit of a perfectionist. So we're working on that. And, you know, I have to stick to that, because if I ask him too many questions, he gets very anxious. And then he's like, well, I didn't mean to what if I am lying, you know, kind of gets in this. It's like, hold up, can I just see your papers? Let's just look at the papers. And even in a healthy way, I think that's a good way for us to operate. So, you know, because we can kind of freak out when someone's, you know, asking, and maybe we know that we did sleep a little late and we didn't make the class or whatever, but when things are not going well, how much more?
Yeah.
Right. Because it's usually covering things up, and it's covering shame and guilt and depression and anxiety. Yeah, exactly.
You know, well, I didn't take the action because I was depressed or I was anxious about it.
Right.
And then I lied about that.
Right.
And then that snowballed. Right. One lie turned to 2, turned to 10. And now it's all a big lie. Right. Right. And it happens. I mean, in my life, it happened to me so quickly when I was young. The same kind of pattern. Yeah. Of course, mine was directly related to the substance use, right? Yeah. And in this case, with my son, it was about anxiety and depression and mental health issues. And so a lot of these symptoms that we're talking about are for both sets. And so I would also urge, let's not just jump to the conclusion that it's the worst case scenario. Right. Right. It could be a very simple solution to these problems, you know?
Yeah, I feel like we tend to like function in the margins. We either don't make it a big deal at all and just pretend everything's fine in that level of delusion, or we make everything a big deal and are kind of in that lane of delusion. Yeah. And then if everything's a big deal, then nothing is. Yes. You know? And if nothing's a big deal, then nothing is. And so how do we kind of stay balanced and give people the space to, you know, be honest, whether that's by word or action. And, you know, you're going to catch people being dishonest. It's going to happen. And being prepared for that, and also knowing that it's not the end of the world, but things can be done, you know.
And also not taking it personally.
Yeah. They're not trying to harm you.
They're not doing it to you.
Yes.
They're doing it because of them.
Right.
Right.
That's really good.
It's so easy to get caught up in that. Like, how could you do this to me? It wasn't about you.
They probably weren't thinking about you at all, other than your disappointment.
Yeah, exactly. You know? Yeah.
They were thinking about how they were going to disappoint you.
And how angry you were going to be. And
how much that may hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even with, you know, a lot of the grown-ups, as we say, like some of the guys that are like in their late 20s and 30s, that really these things didn't start until they were in like a work environment where, you know, they were drinking all the time or whatever, or they walked through a trauma that this, you know, the substances met a need. You know, the dishonesty was never about hurting or harming anyone else. It was, you know, for them and trying to cover up them and the shame and the guilt. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be intervened on. It definitely does. But if we can be as healthy as possible as the person on the other side of it, I think that's one of the best things we can do for anybody.
Yeah. Well, I think just in general, understanding how this all occurs anyway, or like drinking. When I first started drinking was great for my shame and my anxiety. Like it alleviated any social anxiety. I didn't even realize that's what it was that was going on with me. I didn't know it was anxiety. But when I drank, it washed away and I felt better.
Right.
And so I wanted to do that all the time.
Right.
I wanted to feel that way all the time.
Because you wanted to go be with people.
Yeah.
Be out in the world and not feel anxious.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my anxiety was so strong, it kept me from speaking up or talking as much, even when I was surrounded with people because I had anxiety.
Right.
But then that also made me feel like I was dumb and that I couldn't talk or I didn't have anything to offer in it. And so then I shamed myself for that.
Yep.
And drinking washed all that away, right? Yep. I wasn't concerned with any of that. So it was, for me, it was a coping mechanism. It was a solution to the problems that underlie all of my existence and all my relationships. And that progressed over time. And so no matter where we are in life, I believe that when we're turning to that, and not necessarily just substances, it can be any number of addictions that are going on. Like I've talked about, I think in the past, like hoarding or shopping or gambling or sex or porn or whatever it is. I mean, any number of things that are going on that we're using as a coping mechanism to deal with other issues that we're not looking at or addressing. And the issue is that somebody can be stressed out and come home and have a glass of wine or 2 glasses of wine, alleviate some of that stress, go to bed, and they're fine. But for some of us, a certain percentage of the population, when I'm in that space, when I'm using this coping mechanism, it then takes me. Yeah. Right. So this solution, it works for a period of time. Eventually it stops working and I can't stop that. Right. Right. And I remember when I first got sober, my first job in recovery, and I'm working like 80 something hours a week and I'm so stressed. And the way I coped with it forever was drink and use. And I didn't have that anymore. And I call my sister and I go, hey, like I'm freaking out. I'm so stressed out. I don't know what to do. You know, how do you deal with this? And she goes, well, I have a glass of wine. You can't do that, so you better figure out another way. Right. And I'm like, oh, crap. You know, like, thanks for the help. Yeah. You know? That's it. But that happens in all areas, all stages of life, right? And like trauma, and it can be trauma and an injury. Yeah. Where we're seeing guys older that have an injury and they hurt their back and they're getting prescribed fentanyl patches. Yep. You know, and of course that turns into a much more severe addiction. Right. And for some people, they just get clean from that, like detox, and they're okay because they don't have the other components with it like I do. Right. Or this individual I was just talking to about the same thing. Right. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I cannot tell you, years ago when I worked at an orthopedic surgeon's office, how, just every week, people, who'd never had an issue, they would have surgery, they would get prescribed opiates, painkillers, whatever, and it turned so quickly. And I remember being, what if we just told everyone, if you take this hydrocodone and you go, this is how I should always feel, you need to call and tell us. Yeah. Because they were eating whole bottles of pills. These were nurses and professionals, and they, just didn't know until they knew, frankly. And I don't think, we don't educate people, or like drinking is so acceptable. It's not until you show up drunk at the 9 a.m. meeting when it was fine at the 9 p.m. one, and that things shift for people, and until people also will be willing to say something to you about it.
Well, and I think that's the whole point of this, right? Educating, because as the person that was doing that, right, I had no awareness that it was a problem. When I would go out drinking, I'm getting blackout drunk, but I assumed everybody was. I didn't think I was the only one. Right. Like, doesn't everybody drink like this? doesn't everybody do cocaine until they have nothing left?
Right.
Like, that's what cocaine does to you.
Doesn't everyone wake up in a new room?
Yes, yeah.
Not know where they are? That's great.
So I couldn't see that for myself. At least for a long time. I mean, eventually, obviously, I recognized, like, well, I'm normally doing this, but
like when your drug dealer was happy.
When my drug dealer was happy that I went to get help.
That's one of my favorite stories. He's like, "God, finally."
Yeah. No, and I went and told him, like, "Hey, man, I'm moving back to Texas. I got to get help." And he goes, "Man, I'm so happy you're doing that. I've been so worried about you. Like, you're gonna lose a lot of money."
Yeah.
But,
so we all have an opportunity to not be the drug dealer. We can say something.
We can say something
ahead of time.
Yeah.
Like, or, you know, and also make it. It's if you're struggling with this, that's fine. There's literally things you can do to help with it. And
because there were many times in my use where if I would have been approached, I would have done something different.
Yeah.
I would have accepted the help.
Right.
I countless times. I don't even know. You know, all these times where I just hit what I thought was a bottom.
Right.
You know, where I was just done, and I was so hopeless in it all. I thought the only way out for me was going to be death.
Yeah.
That none of this would work for me, and there was no hope.
Right.
You know, thank God I didn't know what I was talking about. I was completely wrong.
Yeah.
And thank God that my family didn't believe that.
Right.
You know, because I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
Right. And they were seeing the signs and symptoms and decided to do something about it. Mm-hmm. So next episode we'll discuss that.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.